every single car that came in, regardless of value, regardless of make or model, it always came with a story. Whether it's someone learned to drive in that car, or this was my mum's car and it's been passed down through generations.
We're never going to act as though we know everything there is to know about a 60s car because we weren't here. The story goes there was a building in the middle of a field that had no doors and no windows. This is a lovely story, whether it's true or not. And the farmer took the building down, and inside was a car, albeit a box of bits.
Particularly classic cars have a story to tell. And I think it's really important that those stories are kept alive.
Because it's still relatively new, and it's very difficult when you're marketing it to sort of say it's going to come with synthetic fuel in it. People automatically, if they don't know what that is, they automatically think it's been changed or it's now got to run on synthetic fuel. Where can I get that from? And it's sort of saying you can get it from us, you can get it from various places, but you can also put normal fuel in over the top. So no one has necessarily been negative about it. Okay, it's just the understanding of it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Future Motoring, which is part of the Ecological Motoring Initiative. We are looking to the future with respect to the past and trying to rethink some of these categories that we all assume are true. For example, that we either love cars or we love the environment. We love both. So that's where we're coming from in this podcast. And we like to talk to people from all sides of this interesting world of cars. Today we have a wonderful example of how this paradox might be held because we're talking with Craig Ranson, who along with his father, Gordon Ranson, started Classic Cars, Bridge Classic Cars, which is a restoration car service. But also we're talking with Rob Harvey, who's on board there too, and helping them create something like a media, gosh, I don't know. I always think of it almost as like a TV channel or something because it's a YouTube, but it's also their website, and they go behind the scenes with the restorations, but they also talk to people about their cars. They have a raffle where they give away some beautiful cars, and they bring the community together for all kinds of great events. And they love classic cars, but they didn't necessarily always love classic cars. They've sort of rediscovered it. Also, they've recently discovered sustainable fuel. And as you'll hear Craig Ranson say, he was a bit of a skeptic about whether there could be such a thing as ecological fuel or sustainable fuel or synthetic fuel, whatever you want to call it. But then he found out that it's actually very easy that you just put it right in with the other gasoline, can put it right on top even. That doesn't mean that the car has to always run on that. It just gets to use it for free, and then normal gasoline will go just fine, or they can continue buying the sustainable fuel. I find that very interesting as a way to complement ideas of electric cars, which more and more people are embracing, also hydrogen, and also still to love our classic cars because, as Rob says, this is actually a good fuel for classic cars because a lot of these old beautiful cars aren't being used all year long because they don't have good heating or because they're often on the classic car circuit, or people just don't drive them except in the summer, so on and so forth. And synthetic fuel or sustainable fuel is a great alternative because then you can keep the fuel in the car as you store it and it doesn't go bad. But I'll let you listen to them. They tell it all much better. I really love what they're doing at Bridge Classic Cars, and I didn't expect it, but this word bridge actually became a sort of rhythm of our conversation because they're sort of bridging the classic car community with a possible sustainable way of driving those cars. And they're trying to think about ecological motoring and what quadrant we might be moving into, trying to make it more desirable. But at the same time, they're also bridging generations because they're talking to a lot of people at all different ages, including children. There's a wonderful children's book called Rilee, which Craig made, and you'll hear more about, and I've read. I'm going to link to it. It's actually causing quite a stir. And it's even more exciting because it's about a little car, which is actually a real car, which you can see in the background if you go to the Substack and watch this video, because they're actually in their studio there, or in their garage, which looks like a studio. And this car, Rilee, is behind it. One of the first cars ever made, perhaps, prototype, a classic car. I'll let you listen to their story about it, but it's just another way that they're bridging different, seemingly opposed areas of car love, of everyday life. Bridge Classic Cars is located in Suffolk in the United Kingdom. If you're ever in the area, I suggest go by there and say hi. But you can also see almost all of this online because they have this media company, which if you watch their content looks very professional and is very professional, but it's actually 4 people: Craig, Rob, a wonderful person named Molly, who's a bit of a star in her own right, which you'll hear about, and a cameraman named Nick, who is also amazing. And they just work together as a great team. And that's unusual, but it's another bridge because you get a sense of their authenticity and the importance of community to them, but also that they're creating a project and doing something from a place that really inspires them and that sees cars from a lot of different angles, whether that's from the media side, the design side, the engineering and electrical side. There's all these things represented there in that garage, and a lot of really talented people from a lot of different backgrounds, because they do operate a full in-house service. So that includes restorations, tuning, rebuilds. They even do electric cars, services and repairs, and there's paint work. Everything is there. And they are also creating different community events. They go to the festivals like Goodwood, which, by the way, did you know that all the cars are running on synthetic fuel at Goodwood? Also at IndyCar, maybe you heard my discussion with Tino Belli of IndyCar. They're also using sustainable fuel. It's easy to do. It's a little too expensive still, but that could change. And it does reduce the carbon footprint, sometimes up to 80%. So this is another alternative, everybody. There's EV, there's hydrogen, there's public transportation, there's bicycles, there's all kinds of ways. And there's also other kinds of sustainable fuels that help to decarbonize the mobility sector. Of course, there's a lot of different views about what's good and what's not good, but this is fossil free, and that could be a good thing no matter how you feel about fossils or fuels. But 80% emission reduction is pretty dang good. Also, you can just drop it in. It's road compliant. It's high performance. It's in the motor cars that are racing out there. It's an option that we could all do in everyday life that doesn't require so much, or that we could at least try to make more available for everyone. I am a bit of a nature lover, to say the least, but I do love transportation. I love thinking about it historically, and I've seen how important it is to all of us, how much we are changed by the cars that we are around, or by the ways that we move through cities, for example. So I love talking to people about it and learning more and finding ways to build bridges. So that's why Bridge Classic Cars is a wonderful topic for this podcast. And I hope you have a look at this Rilee, the car that you can follow its story online, but also the children's book, especially if you have a kid. It's great. There's 3 little cars in there that are just super cool. Also, check out Bridge Classic Cars if you're in Suffolk. If you're not in Suffolk, check them out on their website or on YouTube. Look at some of their videos. Also, go to the Substack and sign up for this, and you can see the video of them talking, which is great because you can see the garage in the background, and you can even see the real Rilee right behind them. I hope you'll join the Substack. You can pay if you want to support this initiative, or you can sign up for free, so it's your choice. But we'd love to see you there. Thank you for listening. I'm really glad you're here. Let's go.
We've got
What's that?
taking our photos right now, so we're quite used to having cameras around.
You have your own sort of, you seem to have a media world almost, just looking at the...
Yeah, but it's really funny because we're still a really small team. You know, there's only sort of 3 really and myself that are involved in the media side of it. We do try and think big and talk big. We look bigger than we are.
Well, you look great. It looks like very professional, which isn't so easy to do. But I guess just to start, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, so I'm Rob. So I kind of run the marketing team here at Bridge Classic Cars. Been here for about 2.5 years now. Craig brought me on board. So I lead the team that creates all of the pretty media stuff that we put out, but it's kind of a really big team effort. So Craig comes up with ideas, Nick, our photographer, comes up with ideas, Molly, our presenter, comes up with ideas, and then we coordinate them and put them all together. So, and I guess my biggest impact I've had so far here is kind of introducing the concept of sustainable fuel and how that can fit in really nicely with classic car restoration.
And I'm Craig, so I'm the managing director of Bridge. It's kind of, there's a lot to Bridge classic cars now, but I still sort of probably put it into two categories. You've got the competition and the media side, and then you've got the restoration side. They work very closely together. So the competition and media side has 4 people that run everything you see, and then the workshop side is slightly bigger. At any one time, there can be about 13 technicians working on cars. We do 40 to 50 restorations or projects, as we call it, at any time. Essentially, I try and oversee the whole lot and make sure it runs all right.
Yeah, I heard you have quite a waiting list sometimes for people.
Yeah, so we've just taken on an Aston Martin DB6, we got the go-ahead last week. So that's going to fill up this year. So yeah, I mean, we're probably looking at sort of 2026 when you think about it, probably mid-2026 until we can see our next car.
Wow, that's exciting. One reason I'm interested in talking to you is because you do a lot of different things that I think are important for the past and the future. And I think that's kind of a hard space to hold these days. Rob, you already mentioned the fuel, the sustainable fuel, which really got my attention. I think with every car you give away now, you give away the car with synthetic fuel.
So every competition car that leaves us has a tank full of sustainable or synthetic fuel provided by P1. And yeah, it's for us, it works really well as no modifications are needed, but they leave us with 80% or up to 80% less emissions than traditional fossil fuel. So one car leaves us a week. So every week there's one more classic car on the road with 80% less emissions.
Yeah, that's very cool. Have you gotten any pushback regarding that, or has it been exciting? Or because sometimes it's hard to hold these things. I love classic cars and I also love nature. And I think actually most people feel that way, but somehow they end up looking like opposites, that if you love cars, you must not love the environment, which is not my experience at all. But I just wonder if that was a hard decision or a natural decision for both of you, or how that felt.
I think the hardest decision from a business point of view is the cost, but someone's got to start it. That was sort of our mentality, that we went down and we were introduced to P1 and the team at P1. And when you look at that against the traditional unleaded fuel, it's a lot more money, but it's only going to get cheaper if more people use it. And I think, answer to your question, we reach a lot of people. So whatever we do, there is always people out there that find fault or a negative. Not too much with the synthetic fuel when we made the commitment to put that in. I think the hardest part is actually trying to explain to people what it is, because it's still relatively new, and it's very difficult when you're marketing it to sort of say it's going to come with synthetic fuel in it. People automatically, if they don't know what that is, they automatically think it's been changed or it's now got to run on synthetic fuel. Where can I get that from? And it's sort of saying you can get it from us, you can get it from various places, but you can also put normal fuel in over the top. So no one has necessarily been negative about it. Okay, it's just the understanding of it.
Yeah. And I guess the confusion or lack of knowledge about the process used to create it in the first place and how that fits in. So we get a lot of our audience aren't the biggest fans of EVs, and a big argument for that is that they're not so environmentally friendly when they're made, for example. And it's a similar thing with the synthetic fuel. It's like, okay, but how sustainable actually is it? You know, so it might be sustainable in the car, but not the process to make it. Whereas with this, it is sustainable. So well to wheel is 80% or up to 80% reduction in CO2. So it kind of ticks all the boxes for us, other than right now it's very expensive.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a wonderful service you're doing, which fits with your wider orientation of the way that you're doing the restoration and working with the cars. You're also in a lot of relationships giving away cars and presenting cars, and you're also have this media, so everything is being presented in a way that is providing information and hopefully understandable. So in that spirit, maybe I want to hear about how you got into this, but before, I think we should unpack that a little bit, what you were just saying. What is this sustainable fuel for someone who hasn't heard?
So the way it's described is it's a drop-in solution. So as long as your car runs on unleaded petrol or traditional fossil fuel, you can put P1 fuel straight into the car, into the tank, and there's absolutely no issues. And we've obviously done our own testing before we've gone live with this. So whether there's traditional petrol in the tank and you put the P1 on top, or if the tank's empty, whatever that may be, it runs exactly the same. There's no modifications needed to any part of the car. So it's
So I could take your car out with the synthetic fuel, and if it runs out, I can just go to the gas station and put normal fuel in. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, 100%. And I think that one of the reasons why it works so well for classics is obviously throughout the year, there tends to be a period of time where classic cars are in storage. And so the best thing with this, or one of the good things with this, is it doesn't go off. So you can leave it in your car. It's not going to deteriorate or separate, which for a classic car owner is a big thing, having to drain the tank or make sure there's not much fuel in it before it goes in storage. With this, you put it away with a full tank of fuel. 6 months time, jump in, turn the key and drive off, and absolutely fine.
Yeah, that's wonderful, because I think a lot of this is trying to hold all of these as possible options, right? Instead of always trying to decide if EV is better than this, or that it's, and I think you present this in a lot of your videos, which I can link to too, but as you just presented, there's sometimes when that's going to be a better fuel than the other. And yeah, so I appreciate that about what you're doing, but I want to hear how it all came to be. It's family business, I think. It's been around for a while. It's at
We're
least
now
20 years old, I think, or something. So yeah, tell me a little about the history.
Yeah, so we started off, myself and my dad. So my background is media and marketing. My background is bottling and packaging of alcohol, essentially, and soft drinks and things like that. So I grew up with him being away in Africa and places like that where drinks get made. But he's always had a passion for classic cars. I've grown up knowing he had a Pagoda, which won many years of Benson and Hedges, which is a big sort of concourse event here. He had Pagoda, which he probably wishes he still had now, because it was
Yeah.
it was a lot less money back then. But yeah, so I grew up around them. And then Bridge Classic Cars actually started off in Essex. We're in Suffolk, so in Essex is where we started, in Colchester, just essentially selling modern cars. We were right next to a railway bridge, so the name Bridge came from that fact. It wasn't enjoyable, in all honesty. We lost a lot of money to start with by selling used cars with warranties and all that sort of nonsense that goes with it. So I was in London, Dad was in Scotland, and we decided, with the help of another guy who joined us, who was a restorer, he sort of said, let's do a restoration company. So it was just him on his own, and we would catch up at weekends and gather all the pieces of paper together and have a filing system. Everything was very old fashioned. And then eventually he needed a second person, and I had had enough at London. So I said, well, I'll come back, but I'm not a mechanic. So in order for us to make this into a viable business, I needed to build a team around me. And that's where I introduced a digital format, essentially. So I threw away all of the pieces of paper and made everything computerized. And then obviously I brought with me the knowledge of marketing that I had. And then 2 people became 3 and became 4. And at one point we were up to 23 technicians, which was superb. We were in a little tiny place in Ipswich to start with, which held probably 5 cars at a push. And if you wanted to test drive the one at the back, you literally had to take the other 4 out in front. And then we found a unit, and at the time it was just a big empty space. And in all honesty, it was quite an uncomfortable conversation between me and my dad, because he's at retirement age now, has been for a while, but he's struggling to let go a little bit. But we stood in this huge building, and it was vast compared to what we were used to. And he sort of said, it's working all right as it is. Are you sure you want to go into something else? And I'm saying, yes, I want to bring everything in-house. So we relied on painters, and everybody would do stuff around us. So we had a paint shop that we used and trimmers that we used. And my goal was to bring everything in-house. So it was our decision, and only our decision. So we took this building on, and then very quickly grew out of this building. So now spread across different places in Suffolk, we've got 3. that are the
Oh,
size of what we are now. The others are storage facilities, and then we're sitting in the members club, which is a new part that we introduced July last year. So four buildings as a whole, basically.
and that's been over about 10 years or so when you, or
Yeah, I think we've probably been in the main workshops. We've probably been in there about 8 years. So
okay. Well, it's very interesting the way you just said you got the name Bridge, because I mean, I'm being a little metaphorical, but as I was talking about, you are connecting a lot of different things now, whether it's classic cars and sustainable thinking, or whether it's, all these different things. So it's actually quite beautiful that it just came from being near a bridge. But what about the love of cars? So it makes sense with the media, because for me, it's very well done, and it almost looks like you are a TV station in a way. I even wonder if people have approached you about partnerships in terms of larger agencies, but these days you don't even need that. You just do it yourself. But I wonder about the love of cars. Did you also love cars? You said your father always loved them. Did you love them as a kid, and you too, Rob,
yeah,
or
I
was
mean,
it more? Yeah.
I grew up around cars from the get-go. Rob joined us a couple of years ago, and it was a funny conversation, really, wasn't it? Because
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't have the kind of love of cars as Craig did from an early age. I always appreciated the look of certain cars. I always, had a car as soon as I was old enough to learn to drive. I passed my test. And so I've always been around cars as most people have. But when it came to classic cars and kind of having a real passion for them, that kind of grew once I started here. So I remember the first conversation with Craig, and he asked me if I liked cars. And he very quickly followed up with, you need to be 100% honest with your answer. So, and I said to him what I said to you, in that I have an appreciation for them, but they're not really a huge passion of mine. But it was once I started here, and writing the stories about the cars that come in. And because what I found most interesting was every single car that came in, regardless of value, regardless of make or model, it always came with a story, whether it's someone learned to drive in that car, or this was my mum's car and it's been passed down through generations. So, and I think as I was writing more and more about them, I did kind of have this passion grew, and I now own 2 classic cars myself as a result. So it's, I guess the passion was always there. I just didn't realize it until I came here and was around them so much.
That's another bridge, but I really understand you, because if you haven't thought about cars before, it can seem like something that you wouldn't be interested in. But then once you do start getting into this community, because it really is all about community, isn't it? I guess that's what you've built, Craig, right? It's a community. Yeah. And you start to realize it's about people, it's about their stories, even the cars themselves, it has to do with artwork, or there's all these attached cultural things in there that one wouldn't really notice if you've never thought about it before. But I guess that word community, I'd like to think about that a bit, because when I've heard about you or I look around, people are often, it feels like a community, or there's a lot of group events. Yeah, what's that word mean for you?
it's
What's
really
the
nice
best
to
word?
say it, or because I suppose that's one of the things that we try and put on. We have created this community by the fact that you can look on our website and you can follow the projects and you can really get involved in it. I think cars have always been a talking point to everybody. Even whether you're into cars or not into cars, there is always a story, like Rob says, there's a story to tell. And certainly when we were in our old premises, that was in the town centre, and the amount of times that you would have someone standing at the door talking to the technicians about a car they once owned or knew of, or had a friend that owned one. Everyone wants to talk about it. And that's what we created at Bridge. We started to put on events, when we realized how powerful the website was for people, and it was a go-to place for people. It wasn't just when we created the projects that people could follow a restoration. Essentially, that was just originally made for the person who owned the car, but they could be anywhere in the world and they could log on and see what happened. And then all of a sudden we started to realize that everybody else was doing it as well, and following a journey of a car that wasn't anything to do with them. So we created the events, and the events are pretty much free every single time that we put something on. It's free to build a community. We get a lot of people that are single, or and they'll come and they have their friends that come along. So it's really nice, sort of the feel, I think, of what we've created. I would probably see that as a community.
Yeah, you have, do you have, so I know you give away these amazing, beautiful cars and people just pay a few pounds, I guess, and then it's a big thing. And there's this online space, right, which is a community, which you were kind of describing, where everyone can come kind of see these stories. And I think that's probably where your media expertise adds something, because it is great to watch, right? I mean, people could just tell their stories and you don't really listen because it's not told in a way that grasps your attention. But on the website, you do that. And I guess that's coming from your media background, which I hadn't really known. And you have Molly too, which is quite spectacular.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, Nick is I think Nick is one of the best photographers and videographers that I've ever seen. He has no photography or video background. He has no
Oh,
qualification,
really? Wow.
all self-taught, and his confidence is not always there. And I'm not sort of speaking behind his back. He'll sometimes look at the products he makes and he's not sure it's good enough. And we're looking at it and going, wow, I mean, it's absolutely incredible how he can tell a story. He's a very talented guy. So he brings a lot to the table. And like you say, Molly is superb. I mean, Molly came to us again, a similar sort of background to Rob, that she had absolutely no interest in cars, really, did she? Her background was vintage. She was part of a vintage trio, as she still is, which is they're quite big around here. And she joined us sort of to be the face of the brand. And we tried to reassure her that we'll have the knowledge of cars. And as a team, we will put content out there that hopefully will appeal to everybody. And then the more and more she's done it, the more she's got involved and got a bit of a passion for the cars herself. But the nice thing about all of our content is all unscripted. We are just a team of four that turn the camera on and see what happens. And I think it works. We gel as a team. So yeah.
Yeah, it does. And that's interesting. I didn't know she's part of a trio. Like, that means a singing group. Yeah.
They're quite big around here. Certainly when there's any sort of reenactment events, which you get quite a lot around here, classic events, then normally the Cordettes are there.
And she's also developed, I mean, when you listen to the videos, she sounds like she knows everything about cars. I mean, all of you sound like you've been studying cars forever, but I guess it just happens fast, right, in the community.
I think for me as well, coming in, as I said earlier, with not the automotive background, it does happen quickly. It'll just be a conversation with Craig. And we went out for a drink after work the other night, and we were talking about one of the new cars that had just launched, and I was just like, how do I know all this stuff? I think when you're around it so much, you do just absorb it. And I think Molly would say the same. We have certain makes and models of cars that we've done regularly on competition, so MGBs, classic minis, and she'll remember stuff from the previous car. So although it might be slightly different, whether it's a different engine size or whatever, she does have that knowledge. And I think we don't always realize the knowledge we have until we start talking about it. And that tends to happen on camera. The camera comes on, we have a conversation, and then afterwards we're like, oh, we do know what we're talking about here.
People appreciate it.
They sound like it.
That's one of the things we've always done with all of the videos we do, is honesty. Molly likes small cars. She likes minis. She likes Fiat 500. So put her next to that and you can see the passion is there because it's what she likes. She doesn't try and act like she likes something she doesn't. And that's a little bit like all of us. It's a funny conversation I sometimes have with my dad, that what I would consider a classic car, I have a little collection of cars myself, but they are Citroen Saxo VTR. It's all those sort of things. Whereas my old man sits there and goes, well, it's not a classic. That's a modern car. We're from a different generation. So we're never going to act as though we know everything there is to know about a 60s car, because we weren't here. So
exactly. That's another bridge, right, between generations that I think cars can do, is it does open up those kind of spaces. And that's one thing I do like about looking at your videos too, is that authentic reaction, even if it's about, do you like this car, or what do you think about this EV idea or something? You just kind of say what you think. And I think that's very helpful for people, because no one really knows how to deal with all of these subjects, and no one really knows everything about every car. So it can be helpful to see, everyone has their different way of coming at it. Has that changed? Yeah, go ahead.
Really good example of, I probably speak for all of the people that watch our stuff, because when Rob came to me and said, have you seen this, wasn't at all interested. I'm so used to building how a car was when it came out of the factory, and there was a time where it's this E10 E5 conversion stuff, and you had to change the rubbers and you had to change the metal, and Rob sort of said, what do you think about putting this? And I sat there and thought, well, it's too expensive, and also, what am I going to have to change in these cars? And then, so I was very much like what our listeners and viewers are. And then when we went down to, so we were invited down to meet the guys at P1, and I sort of said, well, what's the catch? What do we actually have to do? So Martin was there, who's the CEO of P1, and he said, absolutely nothing. You can put it straight in. And that's when my ears pricked up, and I thought, actually, let's look into this a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful example too. And I'm not sure if it was in your writing, Rob, or in one of your discussions, but you also talk about how racing is now, a lot of the races are using this. And I imagine that's something that even people who watch races might not think about, that they also use this fuel sometimes, or Goodwood, I think you said they totally do.
So Goodwood Revival this year is 100% sustainable fuel. So if there's a car on the track racing, it has to run on sustainable fuel. And P1 is one of those fuels that will be there. And I think for us, it's growing in racing. So P1 was initially marketed as a racing fuel. The barrels still say racing fuel. And we've now kind of, we want to bring that into the everyday classic car, So the motor racing world has kind of somewhat accepted sustainable fuel or synthetic fuel as a really good alternative, but that hasn't transcended over to everyday cars. So I feel like we're probably one of, if not the very first people to put cars that are driven regularly on the road, to show that it may have been designed initially for racing, but it works exactly the same way, on the road, and it is a viable solution for sustainable classic cars.
I think that's very brave and, in a way, obvious. Like, it's kind of funny that nobody has not done that, but that's the way these changes are, that you don't realize how easy it is until it starts. I remember I was just talking with Tino Belli of IndyCar, and I had no idea that IndyCar uses sustainable fuel, right? And he was, oh yeah, we've been doing it for years and years. And it's like these things that you just don't know. Once you know them, it changes a lot, right? It changes your, I don't know, how have you seen it? Have you seen that it becomes just something familiar, even with your friends or people who don't know about cars? Have you seen how what you're doing, not only with the sustainable fuel, but cars becoming part of your life in a different way, changes maybe their views of it, or I don't know?
Probably not, in all honesty. We would like to have seen, and that's why we sort of took the commitment, is to get the message out there. But it isn't there yet. I mean, we're such a lot. We're a small part of a massive message to try and get everybody involved. I mean, like you said earlier on, it's a bit of a no-brainer. You sort of have to you sort of sit back and think, well, why have the government not got involved in this? I don't want to get political. Why have they not got more involved in this? For us, I haven't necessarily seen too much of a change. I've certainly seen people are positive towards what we're doing, but I haven't necessarily seen anybody commit as yet. But I didn't really know what to expect. I certainly weren't expecting everybody who watches us to all of a sudden come and buy a load of fuel off us. But I suppose it is just getting the message out there and getting people to understand that it exists.
Yeah, and a lot of that you don't see right away. It changes something in the way people think, and then they realize it's an option, but it's not something you would necessarily see. But I think it's very important because, I don't want to talk about politics either, but a lot of times in politics is these very big decisions that get made. We have to go all one way or all the other, rather than that in the everyday world, our everyday life, we actually have options that aren't that hard to do, and you don't have to do them all the time. For me, that seems like more of a place to start. I don't know how you feel about it.
Really good point. When we stood with him at Vintage Bentley down near Goodwood, he said he stood on the stage, presented to a lot of people like us, probably more influential than we were. But he said, the everyday person that drives a £4,000 Astra can't afford to go and spend £50,000 on an EV, but the government are expecting you to. That's the thing. And he's not saying you shouldn't go and buy an EV. He's just saying there are other options out there, this being one.
And I think
Yeah,
for
exactly.
really good thing and a really positive thing to hear that they were making it very clear that this isn't the only solution. It's a solution, but it's one of multiple solutions that all have their place. So we talk lots about EVs, potential of hydrogen and, you know, synthetic fuel. And we know that moving forward, there's going to be a place for all of them, probably. And there might be some new things that have yet to come around. But, you know, and that's the message we're trying to get across, that this is a solution, and it's a very good solution for us right now that could be scaled up.
Yeah.
But it's not the only solution. There are other alternatives as well. And this is just part of that bigger picture.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's what we need more of, is understanding there are many options and we don't have to be on one side or the other of all of this. And just the information, which relates again to the media and a lot of the different ways that you're reaching people, because you also can't just, it's also about opening those channels in a way. But does it ever get a bit overwhelming to have so many things going on all the time? Because this is a lot to be doing. I mean, to be considered a very good restoration company, which you are, is already something that's hard to do, much less a sort of media company, someone who's trying to bridge sustainable and classic cars. Does it ever get overwhelming, or you just don't think about it?
No, it does. Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm the worst at it, because I will come in with some weird and wonderful idea and forget that I have only got a team, at any one time. There are only 2 people in the marketing office. And I sort of go, oh, let's do this, let's do that. And I get all carried away and excited. But I think we've managed it because we all have a passion, possibly in different things. That helps. Rob's, for a long time, still now, but for a long time, Rob's focus was on sustainable fuel. So it was easy to get the message out there of that. And my passion at that time was focused on something else. So I pushed towards that. So it looked like we were juggling a lot, but technically we were only really juggling what was in our minds at that precise moment. But yeah, sometimes it gets a bit overwhelming because you don't know who to talk to. That's the thing. You sit there and go, oh, we haven't done a social media post about restorations for a while. We're a classic car company, and the last 3 we've done have all been about EVs that have gone to market. We need to rein that in and talk about something that the restoration side. I think that's probably one of the hardest things as a company, is there is still a little bit of this upstairs downstairs divide, I call it, whereas the guys on the shop floor that are fixing the cars, they don't necessarily understand what the marketing department do. So they see Rob or Nick walking downstairs with a camera and they just sort of think, for goodness sake, just leave us alone to fix the cars. They don't see the bigger picture of everything else that we manage. We could do with a few more people, but we do manage at the moment with what we do.
And I think we've got I really like, even though we're a small team, all of our strengths and weaknesses complement everyone else's. So my background is predominantly in writing. So any written content or anything we need written, it tends to come to me. And once I'm done with that, if I need a visual to go with that, I hand that over to Nick, who then makes it look stunning, and if we're looking for a connection to other businesses or whatever, Craig then steps in and does it. So I feel like, although there seems to be a lot going on, like Craig said, we have individual projects that we're passionate about. And then when the time's right, the rest of the team or other members of the team step in and kind of do their bit on it. So I think that worked really, really well for us.
Yeah, that's very interesting too, because it speaks to community, but also to what you were saying about just being authentic, because it actually seems to come down to your everyday interactions with one another. And if you're being authentic there and trying to notice concerns with the technicians between yourselves, then I guess that's actually the root of it, right? Then it spreads up in the right way. But if that stuff gets overlooked or complicated, which of course it does sometimes in all human relationships, but yeah, that's interesting. And another thing that came to mind, you do talk to some of the technicians, I think in some of the video. That's interesting too, to see both sides of it. Sometimes it's really great the way you can just walk around the shop and you see these different things. So in a way, you're lucky that you happen to find such a small group that's so talented in so many different ways, right? With the camera, with
Yeah,
writing.
that's harder. That's been harder than what sort of I ever expected it to be. I think the technicians that are going to be comfortable to talk in front of camera, and the ones that will, be difficult, and no one ever refuses to, but there are certain people that just don't want to do that, and that's perfectly fine. When they come to work here, they kind of have to accept that we have cameras and we have lights and we have all of this stuff. But you don't want anybody to be unhappy. So you tend to turn to the technicians that are more than happy. And the nice thing about it, some of the technicians really do follow us and believe in what we do. And that helps. So they will produce stuff for us, like the painters, for instance, they see our videos and they love how we make them look. So they'll come upstairs and say, I'm just about to paint the Ferrari Dino. Do you want to come and set the cameras up? Rather than us feeling like we're having to chase all the time, they're forthcoming with the information and they're making their own stuff and sort of essentially doing a lot of the work for us. Not always,
Yeah.
but sometimes.
No, that's very cool. I think that has to do with that being authentic too, because in my experience, a lot of these people wouldn't want to have to perform or worry about what they look like, or all of that stuff is just annoying, and so when you don't have to worry about that, I guess it becomes a little easier. You just do what you do, and if you're okay with that being seen, then.
And I think as well, there are certain cars. So a lot of the cars that come in, the technicians have worked on loads before. So although each one's slightly different, they kind of get used to certain cars, I think. But like, for example, the Rilee, because it's so unique and so old and so many people have worked on it, when it was driven for the very first time, and I think you'll see in some of the videos, some of the technicians were out with their own personal mobile phone just taking a video for themselves because it was such a big moment for them, and we've got various bits of footage from the course of the restoration where it's been started up for the first time just as a chassis, and it's nice to see. And I think the turning point was when they realized that what we're doing isn't trying to make them look silly or look bad. We're showing off that you are so talented. We want people to see what you're doing, whether you want to talk on camera or not, we want to show off your work because it is award winning, it's to such a high standard, people need to see it. And I think they're now starting to realize that we don't want them to look silly. We're not trying to show them up, we're trying to show them off in a very positive way. And I think that really turned things around when they realized that we're doing things for their interest. And the reason why we've got a waiting list of 1.5 years is partly because of what they do and partly because of what we do. And we know that we can't shout about how great they are if they weren't great, and people wouldn't know how great they are if we didn't shout about them. So I think it's now really starting to come together where both sides of it understand how important each other is now.
Well said. And just speaking from this bridge, which I didn't expect to become a theme, but this bridging between different communities, it's something that interests me in a lot of different levels, like working with technology and engineers, for example. And it's another thing that people don't, if you're not in the car world, you might not realize what an art and what an amazing talent it is to be able to restore these cars, to understand them, to work on them, and how it does bridge to a lot of other areas of life, art. Once you start getting into these communities, you see how they're all connected. But I think from the outside, it can be hard. So that's another bridge, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'd like to hear about Rilee before we go, and the car behind you, but also Rilee the book. So what about the car behind you? Maybe we could tell people about.
Never thought we would turn out to be how it is. So essentially, we found a box of bits. The story goes, I don't know how true it is, but the story goes there was a building in the middle of a field that had no doors and no windows. This is a lovely story, whether it's true or not. And the farmer took the building down, and inside was a car, albeit a box of bits. So I went with my dad and we had a look, and for as far as you could see was just cardboard boxes full of parts of a car, apparently a car. And the guy we bought it off said, oh, it's complete. So we bought it thinking we don't really know what we're buying here. And then we learnt as we went along. It was so exciting, the thought of building it. So we started to build it and then learnt off people and learnt off just the paperwork that we had. But it was difficult. It was 3 years of not really knowing what we were doing. And nobody, because it turned out to be the prototype, nobody really know what to expect. You know, you had your so-called experts that came along and said, well, that's wrong, slightly too long. This bit's not correct, that bit's not correct. And then slowly but surely, we started to realize it was actually a very, very special car. And the reason why it was too long and this bit wasn't correct in that, because it was the prototype. So it was the first, and it was sort of the learning really from Rilee's point of view. But we got there.
Incredible.
The radiator was missing, which was an incredible story on its own, but it turned out to be the most expensive bit of the car that was actually missing.
And I only know from the children's book that the radiator was found somewhere in a farmer's place or something. Is that really true too?
Story. So a few years ago now, I want to say it was a couple of years ago, but time flies. It's probably about 5 years ago. The day we broke up for Christmas, we were just about the whole team were about to go on their Christmas meal, and a lady phoned up and she said, I think I've got your radiator. And we were like, right, okay. And we had a conversation. So one step further back, the radiator was missing. So we went to get one made, and it was going to cost us £16,000 or £17,000 to make. And we were like, wow, this is far, far beyond what we could afford to spend on a radiator. Anyway, so we put that to one side, and then this lady phoned. She said, I think I've got your radiator. I've been following the journey of Rilee so far on your project. So it shows how powerful the website was. And I think I've got it. And she worked for an auctioneer, a gentleman who had a nice large house, had passed away, and he had a room that was full of brass. And we worked out that it was the radiator because the other radiators were on cars, because the cars exist. So that's how we knew this must have been the car off this radiator. The radiator off this car. Unfortunately, she couldn't sell that to us because she's an auction house. They had to do things fairly. So she sort of said, you're going to have to come to the auction, you're going to have to buy it. You're going to either have someone who knows you want it, who will fight against you. You're going to have someone who wants to buy it and make it into a mirror or something like that, or you're going to be lucky enough to buy it. Eventually, cut a long story short, she spoke to her bosses. They agreed to sell it to us. They didn't want a lot of money for it. We offered a lot more than they wanted, so everybody was a winner because we knew that buying a new one would have been 16 grand. So that's how we sort of put it all together. And then we went on to find, which is in the children's book as well, there's a tiny little dent right at the bottom, and we managed to find a photograph of our exact car from 1918, and that's the front. Two gentlemen sitting in the car, and there's a little tiny dent on the front, so we know it is our radiator. So it's a fantastic story of putting the car back together.
And just for those who have no idea what we're talking about, what would you say about this car if no one's ever heard of the car or seen the videos yet, or even knows, I mean, why was it so special to find the prototype?
Well, we didn't know at the time. I mean, so my dad wanted it for the simple reason he's very much into London to Brighton. So he wanted a car of that style. They're few and far between a car of that style. Turns out this car can't do it. It's not eligible because it's being made slightly the wrong year. Very close, but it's not eligible to drive it. So that's why we first came about it. We never knew at the time, obviously, it was going to be the prototype. It was the Rilee experts that got involved and helped us piece that together. But for anyone who's not seen it before, it's a very, very early car. It's a 1905. It runs with a traditional engine. We've built it probably with 80 or 90% of the original parts. So even the wood that you see is all the original wood. We've kept the original hood, we've kept the original seats, and they're all in frames dotted about this building. And we tried to build it using as much of the original parts as we possibly could, just to make it that little bit more special, really.
And I think ultimately the big thing with it is, so it's the prototype for the first ever four-wheeled Rilee chassis. And it looks like it's the first production car to have fully removable wheels. So before this car, you would take you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, take the tires off the wheel, but the wheel would stay on the car, and then you change the tire. Whereas this was the the prototype for the car where you could take the entire wheel off and swap it for a spare. So whether it would have happened further down the line, we don't know. But the way we look at it is, without this car, we wouldn't have the cars we do today. We wouldn't have wheels that we could take off. It might have been further down the line for that to happen. So, and this was from 1905, but this model wasn't released until 1906. So it's a whole year earlier than the actual production models.
It's really incredible. I mean, it's like a treasure trove for automotive historians. I'm surprised you don't have people, you probably do have museums wanting your car, but
Know what to do with it. That's the thing. It's one of these, it's cost us a lot of money. So in theory, we could sell it. I'm sure we could sell it. Deep down, I really don't want to sell it. I don't want to use it. It's not like I want to be taking it on the road or taking it to any shows. I just love it sitting there exactly as it is now.
Although it does drive.
Yeah, it does drive. We've driven it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to end up, whether it will be a museum. I would love, obviously, which we can go on to, I would love to keep hold of it and for the space we're in now to be a museum. Hence why I created the children's book as a way of keeping the car.
Yeah, tell me about that. Just to end, we're bridging future motoring, forever motoring, past, future, children. So let's tie these themes together a little bit, because I mean, I was going to ask you about that. It does seem like, it's yet another scale to add to all the many things you're doing, but you do have something like a living museum going on. And I know that connects with the children's books. Maybe just tell me about the children's book even first.
Yeah, right. Okay. So I've always, for a long time, I've wanted to create a children's character. I never really thought when I first did it that it would be Rilee. And then that idea just popped into my head one day when I was sitting in a hotel in Manchester on my own. And I thought, that's a good car to use. But yeah, I mean, I grew up with Brum and I grew up with Thomas. Thomas is obviously still a huge part of children's lives now. Brum isn't. Brum has disappeared, but I've got a little boy who's now 7. And when he was sort of 4, 5, 6, I was watching Brum with him and he engaged in that. And I remember growing up, you would see an old car and you'd automatically go, oh, it's Noddy, or you would say it's Brum. And I think I've always kind of wanted to do that myself. I like coming up with new ideas. We discussed obviously that earlier on. We can be just a restoration company, but then we create the media and then we create competitions and we've created the members club. So I kind of feel like along the way, I like to try and introduce new things that might potentially become big things. I suppose when I came up with Rilee, I'd never thought it would engage with people as much as it already has. And bear in mind, we've not really put it out there. We've put it on our own website. We've spoken about it ourselves. We've not sent it to anybody. We've not created a hype around it just yet. But I worked with Sally, who is the theatrical director. So she has helped me sort of take the idea that was in my mind and speak to children and tell the story. And it's all pretty much a true story. So we tell the story of how Rilee has been built, albeit we've made it childlike and exciting. And then Rilee was put away in World War II. The reason he or she, we haven't put a sex to the car. The reason why they were put away in World War II is so that the parts weren't stolen or sold or anything like that. Been brought back to life and has met 2 other classics, Luxie and Eco. They're classic generation, so they're classics from the 60s. But the 3 of them go on to have an adventure, and Eco and Luxie teach Rilee what it's like to be a classic car in today's world. But the unique thing about all 3 of them is you've got Rilee, who was built using all of the parts from 5, but then you've got Eco that runs on sustainable fuel, which is perfect for what we talk about. And Luxie is an electric classic car. So someone has taken all of the engine, everything out, and made Luxie run on electric. So they're all perfect in today's world, but it hopefully will educate children that these things don't need to be thrown away. They can be worked with. They can be brought into the modern world and keep up with traffic nowadays.
And I think as well, the fact that they all run on a different type of fuel, again, comes back to what we were saying earlier, that there isn't one solution. There's multiple solutions and all of them have a place. And that's why all three of the initial characters run on a different fuel.
Yeah, and they even sort of talk about it in the book. They sort of let each other be who they are without trying. So it's interesting. People just have to look at it and read it. But all these themes we've been talking about are sort of in that story. I guess, Rob, and then to end with Greg, like, how do you connect this to Bridge Classic Cars? I mean, what is, because I feel like we're telling that story that you just told is sort of in a version of the story of the business in a way. But I wonder how you see it when you think of the future. It can be the future of motoring, but also, what you're doing there with all these different moving parts that are actually connected by a narrative as a writer, Rob. Like, how are you seeing that? You don't have to have the perfect answer, but what comes to mind?
For me, like I said earlier, I think every single car, particularly classic cars, have a story to tell, whether that's, someone's first car or it's been a car passed down through the generations of a family. And I think it's really important that those stories are kept alive, and we have cars that come in now that on paper wouldn't be worth much financially, but to the owner of it, it's the most important thing in the world, and that's all they want, and there's going to come a point where we have to make a change for the sake of the environment, whether that's the petrol and diesel ban or something else that comes along. We're going to have to make a change. And I think the way we're bridging the gap between where we are now and where we're going to be, we need time to do that. And I think what we're doing with, educating kids about the various options, the way we run competition cars on synthetic fuel, and just showing that there are alternatives, and it's just going to take some time. We don't want everyone to make an immediate decision, an immediate change to how they run their cars and how they live their lives. So ultimately, it's a long-winded way of saying, to keep the stories of these cars alive, we have to change. And for us, we are changing. We want to lead the way in that change to keep the cars on the road, in people's garages, and and be able to tell the stories to future generations.
Yeah, that's well said. Yes, so the classic car stays alive as we change. It's not going away somehow through the story. So that makes sense. What do you think, Craig? It's all these things that you've started. How do you
Yeah.
see it going forward? What's motivating you towards the future?
I think it's not letting go of the past. I think that's the thing. It's very easy to, I said it in a previous video, that we live in a throwaway society now, and it's really difficult to keep up with what we're doing now. And I think it's going to become harder to do that. For a long time, I think the next thing for us is to look at the 90s cars, and they've got diagnostics. At the moment, if someone phones up and wants us to plug something in, we're very honest. We say we don't have the tools to do that. So the immediate future would be to do that. And I think if the government had their way of everything being EV, I think naturally that my business would turn into classic cars being converted to electric. But I don't think we should specialize in that, because I think anyone who does specialize in just that, there'll be new technologies. I mean, when Rob introduced sustainable, I never knew about it. I didn't know that was even a thing. And my focus was on, I've got to turn my business into converting into electric cars, because that's all I'm going to be able to do. In the future, it isn't. And I think I'm now starting to realize that it isn't. We will probably offer that service one day, but I certainly don't want to let go of classics. And I don't think I really want to get into modern cars either. You can go round any corner and you can see a garage that works on modern cars, and they work on our cars, our everyday cars. But I want to stick to classics. And from a business point of view, that does mean that as a business, we need to evolve. We need to create things like the competitions, because selling cars the traditional way, there's so many people doing that these days. And then Rilee coming along and creating a children's book. It's all about what's next. What can we do next to evolve the business and to keep it going? If we just stuck to being a restoration company like we were 10 years ago, it would be totally different now. We wouldn't be sitting in the space we are now. We wouldn't have the customer base that we have now. I'm noticing a difference in the customer base. The money is not necessarily there anymore to spend on the sentimental cars and the reasons why people want to restore cars. It's harder for people to justify what they're doing. So it's just a business point of view of think outside the box. You know, what's next all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that space that you stay in of just kind of being open to a lot of different ideas, and yet you do have a few grounding threads, right, that we've talked about. I mean, community and trying to be authentic, and there's these kind of rhythms. So I just want to say thanks for what you're doing, both in this media world, but also in everyday life, because they're both really very interesting. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to be sure that people know about? Or
I think you've covered everything. I think it's really nice that you've taken the time to watch our videos and do the research. It's really nice. You know, I felt like we speak to people who you can tell have never read it or seen it, or so it's lovely that you have. I really appreciate that. So thank you.
So yeah, it's really nice. And this is how we film our kind of talk shows, where we just sit here and we say, this is roughly what we're going to talk about, but how we get there, we'll just see what happens. So this is a really good format for us.
Yeah.
It's a really comfortable one. So
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
it's important to be able to hold the space for all the different things that you're doing, and I really do find it interesting. So I hope more people think about it, because it's inspiring, it gets people's attention, and it is creating bridges. So good luck, keep going, and send me whatever links I can share with everyone.
Thank you.
All right, well, be well. Have a great day there.
Okay.
Bye.